Habitations to inhabitation zones in sequence, coming in track centers to higher formation grounds of frequency lines into flux. This basically changes all positions of ports and data screens and operation surface interactions, how to really get in that communication into higher levels. Coming in lines, you guys got your core centers, your plasma center lines that puts all communication to your cycles, that generates the communication setting of surface, processing communication lines into your settings. And zero, that zero line comes into its primer, comes into its circuits, comes in its prime mates. Now, those electrical systems and attractions come in all track locations when it comes in your inhibitors. Calculate, modify the habitation zone and inhabitations. So we're going to go through the inner lines, the outer line links, and travels and mechanism, changing all communication setting into sight lines, high interference into all communications to your settings, coming into your antennas and location to your beacon lights, knowing how to use that track location to its system through activations. Setting communication to its cycle and generation screens. Now, in that lines of communication, you guys have your test. I know it's 11 screen lines, adaptation cycles. So in that track lines, its communications get school over in tractions and direct signals and get you guys in sequence. I've already emailed whoever sent me the test, and you guys are in your position lines at track centers and track location systems. If you want to go higher levels in the mine lines, you have to hand in your settings. That's why we have Q&A. If you have to work, that's totally fine in that position locations. But this is true that you understand how to come into higher levels of sequence in that track lines and positions. All right. So welcome everybody. Space-time creator coming in, calculation, screen lines, adaptation of surface and higher lines of travel. It's amazing what I saw in track lines communication system. You guys are finally coming into your codings, which is fantastic. So congratulations on that. Pat yourself on the back. So it's all about understanding the conscious awareness that you have already in sequence. Now you have to understand how to get in that position locations. For example, I have this, but I've always had this, but I don't get this. I don't get this until I use the mind. And the mind puts the process, everything comes in order. And then you realize everything isn't in order because it's always in times continuance, space continuance. That times factor is the screen lines adaptation of existing all at once. So it's basically understanding that, you have phones or anything, your computers, or you're getting this, or you're getting that, you already have. And it's all through frequencies. Everything is at a different frequency level. Everything you touch, anything you come into, it's all of the vision. So the conscious and awareness, okay, is balancing your awareness of where you are and your consciousness of already what you have through knowledge. That puts you in times continuous, of space continuous, of space-time operations. Now, getting into that position location, this helps you and guides you. This is what it's all about, guys. It's all lines of sequence. Now, because you're in your position location, your high cycles puts all communication lines of grounds. Now, understand how to use that information system. You track the centers. That puts all communication system in travel, right? All right, so we got line signatures, lines of triangulation. Let's go with that line cycle. And then we got position lines of box frames. Let's go in that cycle. Let's go to star mixture and time sequence, line conditions of 5 settings. Process calculation lines of 2 wavings, and 3 track location lines, high center locations in Fibonacci, and sec correlation. All right. Travel point lines of graph, point lines of settings, processing communication system. So you guys have to really come into all of us in structure and design schematics through primer and how to go through coding. All right. You're getting communication lines of the space line, right, which is all coding settings, and the ground lines of earth line rotation, which is a pixelation graph. Right. So it's now the inversion system. So in that lines of course set and line conditioning system, your coding is now in modification of the mind now that's changing your position locations, how you get into your settings, how you process your binaries, your transistors, your resistors, your light switches, and all through your algorithms, right? Coding system of space, power lines and screen lines, the center operation of you, and process of communication of earth, and structures of physical line connection, high center interference. Metaphysical, mental capacity, process its communication system all through the electrical system, through the spiritual system, and the emotional line track centers. But it's all lines of adaptations in all communications of structure and set position. All right. So I'm going to show you how this all works in tractions. So we'll do this again in earth line because you guys are now in inversion, right? So lines of box, that's line of position triangle, set position location Fibonacci, and lines, more lines of high center interference and travel endpoint communications. Setting direct lines of signals in all communication centers, process its communication to the surface, sending communication lines and attractions, in all direct lines to high centers, in all positional locations to its system, all through communication line screen, and direct lines of coding. That process in that position locations puts everything in sequence. Okay, so we start with that line, right? Okay, so earth line equals lines in habitation, two sets lines to two lines attractions, standby, line centers, and inhibitor. Now, inhibitor lines of screen adaptations into 24 cycles in travel and communications. Now, again, that communication lines and ground lines, you go to encode configuration system. Okay, star line, okay, equals lines of run. Okay, so stars equals lines of run, right? So understanding the pixelation graph, yours, of course, centers lines of two W's. To set position a percentage over screen. Okay, that's it there. That's it through coding. That's it through coding. That's it through the earth when it comes into schematics. All right. So your mind is now switched. And what that means is the inhibitors to its habitation zone, to its inhabitation zone, is now 0 lines into 1 cycle. That puts lines of communication sounding into 0 gravities, into center communications, in process calculation, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface and traction. Now, in that direct lines, we flip the anomalies in rotation spins, process communication lines of platforms and tractions. Now, directing line course centers gets more complicated because everything is set correlations to its cycle. Setting core lines of high center interference, lines of 6 over line, 5 over lines, and 1 over 6. 1 over lines of 1 line setting in position 9 over lines that equalize core centers and standby. So you have to understand the 4-line communication system, earth lines attractions, earth line division, earth line locations, sending communication high ground lines, and flux capacitor. All right, so that's what it is. You're taking the schematics. Your earth line is now in schematic line. So you guys are getting out of structure on paper, and you're coming into the mind now. So the mind is all lines of configuration of coding. Getting you guys instruction lines of waves, start with that cycle, right? Process lines of WW, okay, across 2 indicates settings percentage over question. Direct lines, initiate, okay, equals lines run, okay? So you have to understand what this is through a pixel, through a drawing. So we get 2 W's lines of weather, screen lines adaptation processing, 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 traction, right? Directing lines and high center interference, 2 over lines of sequence, line direct signal. So what I'm doing is creating a structure line through coding. The mechanism lines of power is the percentage over screen over direct signal. That process lines of high cycles, line condition system into interstellar correlation setting into oscillation screens. Directing lines into position locations into solar flares and track location system into solar generation line condition setting of solar webs. Now the solar web lines its communication setting to its location grid. So you're having a conversation on a 4-line cycle that sets lines communication setting through calculate modify. This retriangulates its position of its program in track location to its setting through its location grid, directing lines of 0, directing lines of 1, directing lines of platform in 3 cycles. Setting core lines settings into 2 atom lines as shape lines of anomaly in 3 track locations. Directing lines of modification ground, center core system of the Earth rotates the system in track location system through its ether, its core, its formation settings, and track location to its setting to its firmament. Directing core centers process communication setting in track location to its system all through solar line center. Processing communication system, all communication lines of direct signals and modification grounds coming out of portal communication. All right. So it's a constant continuous flow. The only difference is you guys are getting off paper and now you're in the mind. The configuration of coding is now in signal. So the process of the traffic and the inventory puts everything in communication setting and all track location system in travel communications. Okay. So it gets a lot more understandable through understanding to be understood to know exactly how to communicate to line screen adaptations. All right, processing position lines attractions. But you have to understand, this is all lines of Earth now, right? Your central system is lines of coding that hides its signals in travel and communication. Getting direct line signals, platform 1, platform 2, platform 3, platform 4, platform 8 in travel. So it's a constant continuous flow. Line signals, lines of 5 tractions, 5 weather patterns, and direct signals. S-line charter waves, directing lines of Fibonacci line screens, adaptation system, and track location. All right, process outlines, inner circuits, outer circuits, location grids in the opposite directions in 3 cycles in 3-line rotation surface and track location system and track layout calculations. All right? Look at that. It's disappeared. It's too fast. Okay, setting course centers. This is an elliptical line. Oh, it's not there. See? It goes too fast. You got to see it in position. This is the elliptical line, the center course system that travels at position, location, endorphins, and traction. Sets communication grounds. Has a all line coordinate setting and magnetic line screen adaptation to 3 process communication setting to travel. Directing lines course centers in position lines of triangulation, position lines of box, and position location triangulation, position lines of box and track location lines, A lines of tractions, B lines of C, C lines of A, and A lines of D, X. Processing communication of 4 lines of cycle. Process line, process system, travels, directing in modification lines of 3 tractions. Now, directing symbolism, process in communication system, all kept and modified through an energetic dome. Directing line signals in process communication ground lines of surface that sets track location system in line calculation. This comes in the oscillators. An oscillator line track sets communication setting to its position. Travel endpoint lines graph, inner center line rotation surface and tractions. Now, directing lines modification grounds, set lines communication high center interference, 3 lines of flux, sets core lines and high direct signals into travels, direct signal. Okay, look at that, disappeared. It's going too fast. So you have to catch the wind through the interstellar to the oscillations. Okay, process line, energetic line, the roots and line rotation surface and tractions. Oh, it's up there again, see? Goes too fast when you come into more modifications, right? Oh, it's not there. I got to do it again. It's going too fast. Is it there? Yes, it is. All right. So everything I'm doing is all laws of coding. Now you have to understand your mind is now alterated in position of its inception. The correlations of your panels in the line screen is adapted in the line screen adaptations to your inhibitors. Now directing lines of 4 line cycles, we got 0 lines of 24. Position lines of 48 equals lines in frame. Setting track lines into 3 weather patterns, into 3 Ws. Setting lines of communications. Now, lines core line setting is left over right. And position of left over right and right over left. So process in digital lines crossing line signals and time stamping. Process communication open sequence line screen adaptation of flux over line. Process communication ground lines of surface. Puts all position location of its energetic line screen adaptation of center communications and set lines to track communication. Okay? So again, you have to understand a 4-line sequence into code configuration system of face recognition time sequence. Look at that, disappeared right away. It goes too fast. You got to catch it because if you don't catch it, you're not in balance of your system of speed, lines, and acceleration. Oh, there it is. Not there again. I got to do it again. Okay, try to catch it in line screen adaptation to its cycle. Yep, there it is. All right. Process lines of center, line direct signals as center communication setting to point charter. Flux over lines into 0 lines of 24, 48 line provision. Now that sets lines of 3 weather patterns, initiate, run. Execute platforms and direct signals into ground center. Surface lines, 0 lines of 24, 48, 72, and 140 platform and track location. All right. Uplink high centers, linking lines of screen lines adaptation of surface and tractions. Now directing modification grounds, center communications open signals. Flux over line and flux capacitor ground lines of surface and tractions. Directing lines of data sheets, holographic symbolism, line screen adaptations, process lines of platforms, and 3 lines of communication lines of center. Calculate and modify line direct signals into lines of tubing, processing communication lines of astral projections. The astral connection line signals opens higher levels of communication system all through flux. To travel lower layers, lines to correlating high interference, electrical line communication diffusion, sets communication high centers to its earth, and rotation surface and track location. Okay. All right, so that's your earth line. Now it's all lines of clocking system at 3 lines of calculation system. So the actual earth is everything a foundation of clocking. Now let's get into that signal. Now let's get you on the ground lines and high center interference, how to use the position of its inhibitors. 2 track locations, directing lines. We got process lines of 1, 2, 4, and 6 locations. Now we change it this way. What do we have in track locations? Right? Indicate line screen adaptation of sonar. Okay. Process communication high signals align position location to a system through a satellite and track location. Setting line direct signals in the opposite direction at 3-line cycle line screen. Directing communication lines, X marks the spot into lines of Jupiter or Pluto or anything on mechanism lines of screen. Process communication high center interference, sonar comes back in tractions, in signals and modifications. 2 lines of tractions and 3 lines of symbolism. Process communication ground lines calculation system, wave and centrals of ripples. Directing lines of sonar, echo lines of chamber, all lines of communication system, and road graph screen lines adaptation. Okay? Setting core centers and line communication system all through traction. Directing core line centers, set lines in one cycle, over cross locations, set communication lines of center. Again, X marks the spot in 3 settings. Laser tractions, high direct signals, ground center lines of 1 XT, process lines X3, process lines X line, in line rotation surface and traction. Sets calculation modification grounds over line signals. Now this is platted to its location setting through sonar. Travel communication lines of point settings. All right, so you set the inhibitors over line screen in 3 triangulations in position of 4, 6, 8, 12, 24, 48, 72, and 144 platform. Sets communication grounds and surface and tractions. Now, getting into the ground line surface, you got to understand how to get into divots of platforms. Platforms of 1 and track location. All right. Sets calculation lines direct signals to its earth line that rotates the setting and its position location to its system, all through track location and provision. Ground line symbolism and core lines calculation setting. Process lines of 1, process lines of 2, process lines of 3. Now we go into lines of communication setting to purple that sets communication on high centers. Oh, disappeared. Do it again. Is it ready to go in tractions? Yes, it is. All right. Let's go over line screen adaptations. Just all in purple and line screen adaptations. One lines in one color is all color in traction. Setting calculation line high center interference in processing. Let's go into orange symbolism and tracking lines and direct signals and modification grounds. Nope, it's not there, right? It's too fast. Let's see it again. See color, it's very hard to see in traction. Oh, it's there. Process lines of platforms over cross locations, setting lines of high center interference of 3 track location lines of setting. There it is. Change communication of directions in the opposite system. Processing communication system all through traction. All right. Then we go into lines of ground lines of surface and location system in travel. All right. So it gets more fun when you mind alterate the system in the mind line. It alterates the setting and communications to manipulation. Processing communications to over lines of charge. Over relays, line direct signals. So let's get in a code line signal. Process calculation lines of 3 weathers. Indicates position of 3 panels into percentage. Set positions into 150. Okay, that's 150. That's a code signal into 3 tractions. Now, you have XD1000 in position of 3 centers, past, present, and future. All right. The setting communication lines picks up the 3 leathers, high centers, 3 weather line rotations, surface, and tractions, right? That directs lines into position of W, in position of W, in position of W. Sets communication high center interference equals the equations into 1, 1, position of 1, 1, 2, and position of 1, 1, 3. Sets core lines as center core system and travel. It sets communication high center interference into platform. 3 signals in rotation, surface, and tractions. Directing lines as symbolism and 3 rotation, surface, and track location. Very complicated stuff, but you have to truly stand. Mind alterations, 3XD1000 lines. You're going to see a platform of communication. Your code configuration system is always going to be past, present, and future. Now that puts lines of signals into position lines of tractions in 3 centers and set position operation. Now the code signal comes in platforms of A, B, C, D, and E, and F. The process communication energetic line screen overcrosses lines of 3 track location system to laser track location. Directing lines of modification of platforms allocates time frame. That position of its location center, a center communication setting, puts future of nothing in traction. Oh, it disappeared. Set communication line grounds in line screen. Now you have to use the percentage. Using the percentage is line signal location. So you add up 150 line. That's time capacitor, right? You're at 150. Sets coordinate lines of high travels in direction, right? Then you get into lines into Fibonacci in the opposite direct signals in process communications, right? Yin and yang. In lines of correlations, kaleidoscope, communication lines, echo chamber, foxtrot, high center locations, Oscar, November. Fox Charlie, directing instinct locations of Papa uniform, directing line signals and modification ground, set calculation high center interference. Motivation screen, directing line, calculation lines, X-ray, Zulu, line rotation surface, Tango Tango. Set core line centers in a kaleidoscope communication lines of measure. Resolution communication system to all levels of resolution. Directing lines and modification centers of travel. And point communication system through code configuration system. Into 3 W's and core line settings into 1, 1. Position of 2 over lines of 1, 1, 3. Position lines of 4. Positions lines of 1, 1, 3. Position lines of 3. Setting lines of track communication system all through traction. Now, we get in line screen adaptations of all communication setting of track communications. Directing lines, you have to have an indirect and out direct location system, right? 3 lines of cycles, 1 center. 1 system line consists of 9 sequence lines of 2 panels. Process lines and 2 panels over line, all right? Now, that changes the 3 lines of cycles, 3 lines of calculations, 2 lines of tractions, 1 over lines, 2 over tractions, 1 position over line, position lines of traction. Complicated stuff, but the center core system changes all line direct signals into ground lines of surface in modification. Woo! You guys are going, whoa, this is a lot. All through coding, guys, all through coding. That's all it is. So now your structures are going to get more complicated, but a lot more fun now because you're in position, location, and settings to track location, right? But it's absolutely amazing when you get into the mind alteration of the change of the conceptual systems. All right, coding here in lines of space, and this is structural lines of the earth, right? So let's go into provision cycles and track casing lines and high centers. Now the oscillation wind factors. Directing lines of 1, 1, set lines of 1, 1, 1, set lines of 1 equals lines of 3. Okay, directing lines, position of 1 times 1 equals lines of 3. 3 equals lines of 3,000. And track casing line measure into, let's say, 2,500 directing signals into capacity. Okay, puts a cap. Now the correlation setting the atmosphere lines into lulls, protection screen into 3 lines of flux, in set track location system and calculation. Oh, I'm missing tractions. There we go. Right, very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. Code configuration setting to 3 weathers, 3 direct signals modifications, 3 tractions, and 3 downline signals in position. Process calculation lines E lines of 1 in rotation surface. Track location 1 lines of 2, track location lines of 3, track location of 4. Directing lines of laser lines, sky grid, sky net, sky panel, sky traction, high divisions. In lines of parallels that unlines its looping line rotation surface to its oscillation wind factors and weather and communication setting to travel. Oh, look at that. It disappeared. All right, so we're setting up a tornado, indirect line of loop in rotation surface and track location. Okay, now sets core lines of the ground line and symbolism location of 45 angles. Okay, so you have to understand how the mind works and how it motivates the system and travel. It correlates the calculation setting and code configuration system. The moderation grounds, correlating the lines of powers, the generation screen lines and habitation zones, flux over screen, flux over power, power over line, screen adaptation of flux, correlation setting and communication. All right, process lines, Enigma high center interference, Enigma and rotation surface. Oscillation lines and the opposite direct signals in process communication system, energetic line screen adaptations into panels, core centers of warp and traction. All right, setting core centers, X8000 comes in. You see the X8000 processing its position location to its system. Inside, right? Routes the routers, round line, rotation surface, and inhibitors. Rotates the earth, a rotation system, and a triangulation high centers. The process is communication of continuous force, of times continuous, of space continuous, in line screen adaptation that high centers in position of point lines of traction and division. Okay, very powerful stuff in traction, right? Okay, so understanding the inhibitors is the earth line of 1, earth line of 2, inhibitors lines of 3 into molecule screens, and direct lines of A tracks and center to its C line, into B factors over lines of D. Now, equal line core centers of triangulation lines of a split line, directing in communication lines and high centers in position location of your system to your satellites in traction. You see your satellite? Okay. All right. So I think we're catching on quick. That's why I had to come on here, because it's so complicated. Get this done in inhibitors and screen adaptations processing. All right, so you get into line screen adaptations of 3 panels in a 4 set lines and 3 lines of traction. Okay, modification of the grounds, center core system, and line signal. Okay, Ground center lines of 1, ground center lines of 2, and 3 lines of flux. Okay, process lines inhibitors over 0, 0, 0, 4 lines of signals, position of 1, 1, 2 line signals, 1 position, over lines, cross lines, this is where we multitude system. So this X equals lines of 1, line position lines of triangulation. So XT1000 comes in attractions, sets communication lines of flares, flares lines of 1, flares lines of 2, and 1 set position of 3 cycles. Setting core lines settings a 3-track provision. Now we go through the center core system as center communication. Oh, it's not there. So we have the high centers, center communication near flywheel. Now the oscillation wind path changes the 8 central system in travel communications. Directing core centers in one symbolism, one center, one operation to expansion that opens all modification setting a future adaptation system to your quantum self and track location system of center operation. Okay, guys, it's all done. So you have to truly understand how your inhibitors work when you're in position of recharge and remote. All right, see, it disappeared, right? Because it's going too fast. Center core system of 1 traction in line signals. Sets calculation setting to XT that process lines of XJ 1 line rotation. Okay, center communication ground centers, triangulations of flux over lines equals lines of positional levels, power generation lines, solar flares, indirect signals, and ground lines of surface energetic line screen adaptations of processing in communication high center. Nope, it's not there. Let's do it again. Process communication lines of energy line center. There it is. All right, ground line symbolism, cross lines of X lines of 1 in position multitude. Subtract over E lines of 1. That's factors over screen, indirect lines of signature. Pattern core lines into Schumann, core lines and higher self. Add altitudes, position aptitude, screen lines to its avatar. Signify core centers linking to its sim, into sim text and cortex. Now the simulate sets core lines into lines of sum line. Now the sum line cores the centers to its electrical line. The core communication system, all through travel, modifies the system, okay, can modify interaction. All done by equation. All right. This is all done through the inhibitors when you guys are in remote. So it's structured lines as divisions. Now we set calculation system. Okay, so we got a microchip and a 4 central setting, 3 weathers of panels, right? So we had 3 lines of cycles, 4 lines of system, right? That's a triangulation lines into a box. Okay, because it's the female cycle, right? Ground center lines of 1, earth lines of 2. Okay, core lines of 3, in lines of tractions into crop circles in 1 center communication. Very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. So when you guys are in sleep mode, you go into flux line, indirect signals offline. Communicate high centers into pi through communication high setting. Process communication lines of flux and 3 triangulation of 4 lines of communication system and travel. Directing line core centers in a clocking system of 0 gravity in position locations and security of defense lines and center communication. Very complicated stuff, right? Changing the inhibitors over screen, directing lines of calculation, screen lines adaptation. Process lines of indications, XT1001, XT, XT1, and XT4, and set position all on standby. Process lines of indication high center interference. We change the triangulation of 3 lines and coordinates, setting lines of 3 triangulation of high line communication of coordinates, plus over screen, plus over attractions, direct lines of X equals lines of 1, 8 position locations in 1 cycle, 2 lines of center, 2 lines of system, and 2 locations, and 1 platform communications. Now, directing lines of panels allocates time frame. Position lines of 2, 2, 2. Lines in position of Pluto comes in track location setting as security lines of fence. Process communication ground lines of Jupiter over cross location system into 2 lines of waving and track locations. Setting lines of calculation high center interference in Neptune. Process lines into core centers into flux over line in 3 set position of angles and traction. Directing core lines high center interference and position location to your moon and your sun routes the routers and line signals in the 3 lines of flux over line position of 1, 3 triangulation high position program. Directing in modification grounds over cross location signals, line direct signals to earth and traction. Okay, now you have to understand how this is all modified in signal, how to process this through inhibitors when you guys are in sleep mode. This is what happens when you guys get in provision. Okay, I know it's complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun when you understand your planetary settings all through travel, all right? All through inhibitors and location settings, right? So process lines of setting, sets communication high centers into 4 tractions. Directing lines of data, theta, operations service, and omega screen. Directing calculation high center interference of 2 over tractions, 3 lines of signals into Schumann resonance, box frame. Set lines of box frame. Frame communication lines of 0 frame. Process lines of data frame. Data formation lines of screen frame. Correlation lines of computer frame. Open sequence, portals, and communication screen lines adaptation of flux over traction. Very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun when you understand more levels of U through your inhibitors at set position. All right, guys? And then you change it again, right, in symbolism. Different lines of angle, but the same position. Same position, just different line of calculation setting. So the more you understand your body, basically is the center communication system that basically changes everything, but the mind changes all levels of flux, that changes everything through frequencies. Your body stays in the center, but the position of your face constantly changes its setting. So it lines its inhibitors over screen, it platforms over lines, and direct signals, E factors over screen adaptation. Okay? Now, constantly changing that, understand how to use the inhibitors over line. So we have a direct lines of 1, 2, 3, and communication lines of 4 and 5. Set lines of 5, set position of 1, ones of 2, 3 lines of tractions, 4 lines of communication. Okay? Now, get in that position, you have to understand how to get into the coding system of 4 equals lines, percentage, equals lines, calculation setting, brackets, 0, 0, 0, 1 bracket setting. So percentage lines of 5, lines of seconds, minutes, and hours, minutes, and seconds. Now it's position of seconds over lines of past, minutes over lines of future, hours, minutes, lines of seconds, hours, minutes, lines of future, minutes, lines of setting and past, and set position at all levels. Center communication of presence is the avatar line screen, and set correlation to the sim, the modification of the ground lines of surface and traction. All right, core lines of high centers of simulate. Rotation, surface, and track communication, high position, location, and setting. Oh, it's not there. See, traveling too fast. Got to catch the wind cycles, the line screen adaptation to its weather. There it is. All right, correlates and high center interference. Now this is where it comes into, okay, the modify. We take the 5 lines of traction into 2 lines of cycles, 1 line over lines, crossing line, symbolism, location, setting, and wind factors, and 4 track location system, and solar sail. Process communication lines of 5 over 1, over 2, over 3, over 4, and traction. Directing in signals, modify the ground lines. Set the course centers, line communication lines of pi. Pi generates the screen lines, adaptation of flux that puts all communication system into S lines of 1, L lines of 3, 3 lines of 2, 2 lines of 1, and 1 track communication lines. Calculate and modify. Bracket communication of 1, 0, 0, 1,000 line marker. Set core lines into panels, into sonar, and 3 tractions in pi generation of another solar sail. Process communication lines of grounds, overline signals, and a 45 flux, and communication lines of screen. Directing communication line grounds, high core centers. XD1000 comes at platform 1, platform 3, platform 6, and platform center and track locations. Directing line communication high centers, center communication lines of 1, platform 2, platform 3, and platform 6, and line direct signals and correlation system and travels that sets its calculation setting and processing. Processing line rotations of torical fields. Directing lines of course centers the center communication system operation. Time by equation. This is all done through inhibitors when you guys are sleeping. I know it's complicated stuff, right? But it's a lot more fun now because you're getting more confused. See the technology that you already have access to. The more you understand your inhibitors, your microchips, your nanochips, you come into higher communication system, how to use your alpha, beta, theta, omega, zeta, zeta, gamma, radiation line communication, high center location system of travel. But understanding the inhibitors changes line direct signals, processing communication system, all through flux communication. Right? All right, so we change the core centers of traction, that direct signals of derision. See? So, I know it's mind-blowing, isn't it? This is what goes on the skyline, but it's all connected to inhibitors. So this is how it works in tractions. Let's go to line signal. All right, modification grounds. Sleep mode. Directing signals, line screen adaptations of processing. Okay? This is you in traction. Okay? Now, all right, so you automatically got position lines of travels into levels of Pluto. Pluto comes in, line signals and line screen adaptations. Processes lines of 3 angles and 3 tractions. All right? Now, Calculate and modify line course centers in positional levels. Higher self sets communications. Avatar sets the atmospheres. And position center line conditions of the sim sets the sim cortex and 3 triangulation lines of flux over screen line adaptation setting to its center line rotation to its surface interaction. Okay, complicated, isn't it? All through inhibitors. When you're sleeping, this is what happens. Through the higher self, through the avatar of the sim. Now, correlates as high center interference of 3 triangulation lines of flux over crosses located screens, directing in modification grounds. Your core lines are your highways, over lines of screen lines of plasma, the sets of metabed, and rotation spin cycles. So your body starts to rotate and spins on cycles, line condition setting to a highway that rotates the calculation setting to its all line of its metal bed and track location to a system, all through traction. All through traction. Didn't see it's too fast. So this is what happens when you guys go into sleep mode. Recharge a remote. Through the higher self, through the avatar and the sim, right? Coordinates high center interference of 3 lines of flux over 3 screens. Directing course centers line condition setting, your body turns into a mechanism of screen adaptations into a satellite right away in track location. Okay, satellite, guys, look. There it is, satellite. Now, when the satellite reaches lines, it goes to the inferment, core, line condition set in ether, goes back in lines of high center interference to travel sonar, directing signals and position your planetary lines into 12 planets on standby. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's your planets in sequence. Now, directing lines of sequence, line core centers, it's the mind conception out of dream sequence. Processing communication system all through your satellite. Planet lines of 1, planet lines of 2, planet lines of 3. So you're using 3 planets in traction of coding, configuration system, all through tractions. Directing line screen adaptations, all lines of flux in calculus modified and rotation surface of center communication setting to operation. That's what goes on when you guys go in position and sleep. Position lines of tractions into remote, communicates to high center locations in recharge. All 3 inhibitors through your higher self, your avatar, and your sim. Hoo-ah. Now, very complicated, isn't it? Very complicated. Very, very complicated, guys. But it's a lot of fun what goes on in position to your mind and conception. All 3 inhibitors. All right, now, setting tone dividers, setting lines of course centers and earth line rotations, setting track line division, sets correlations of center communication lines of high center interference of flux of atoms. Process lines of atom lines of 1, that's atom tractions, atom divisions, and atom location of 3 cycles. 3 course centers of 3 pi, sonar line defense. Setting lines of 4 lines of signals and 3 communication lines of pi. Process communication high generation lines of center communication lines of pi is set position of future of nothing in traction. Done by equation. Okay, very complicated, but it's a lot of fun. All through the back of your neck. So where you are in that position, this is what's going on in communication in your settings. All through traction. Your coding now is mind alterated now. Your position lines is all lines of line signatures, your traffic, your inventories, and your flows. So you have to truly understand how to understand the coding from here and position the earth line. Because you guys are coming out of structure of design and schematics on paper, now it's coming into the inversion and position and calculation setting to your codings. Your binaries, your cortex, your sim cortex, your mystical cortex, and your matrix core line centers and travel and position point lines of graph and communication system, all through metric meters and scale and track location. Okay, guys? Done by equation. That's it. So it's all done. It's all done. All right, guys? All right, symbolism lines, high center interference, unison, open up port communication, high centers, a satellite, division lines of E, factors over C. Okay, we'll go on the constellation path, and direct lines of course centers into cubicle screen lines of doors, and direct signals modification lines of Q&A. Tractors, communication, high center interference, higher deck, and track locations. See you in 5.